Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org and this is a PHP video tutorial for the new Boston. Now in this video I'm simply going to talk to you about what PHP is, why you should use it, and a little bit of information about what websites do use it. So the first thing about PHP is what it stands for. PHP stands for Hypertext Preprocessor. In fact, the first P is P, so it's PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. That's what it stands for. So we've got a recursive acronym because we have an acronym inside another acronym, because originally PHP stood for Personal Homepage, so it's now been changed to stand for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor, with the PHP inside of that still standing for Personal Homepage. So what is PHP and why should we use it? Well, PHP is a server-side scripting language. Now when you open up a PHP file and you type in the code, it's not available to view by the user of the website. They cannot right click and see your code. So it's not like HTML. With HTML being a markup language, it's interpreted by the browser. Now PHP and the code inside of it is interpreted by the web server and compiled server side, and then the output of the application, if you like, is displayed in HTML if we choose to do so. So it's basically used to create dynamic content on websites. So we're not we're essentially creating a program within a website. So we're being able to do a variety of different things. Now let's head over to the PHP official website, which is php.net. So if you need any more information, I'm just giving you a brief overview here. Go over to php.net and you can read some information about PHP as well as news, etc, etc, etc. So we've got a little description about here about what is PHP, and we've got an introductory tutorial. Now the great thing about PHP is while you're developing, it has a really extensive documentation to it, and this is called the manual. So we've got a link here to the manual, and basically we've got an online manual for lots of different languages, and you can also download the documentation as well. And what the manual will do is we can search in here for, say, function list. For example, we might search for fopen in the functions list, and we see now it returns some information about our function. So we can now go down and look at the different parameters or the arguments it takes, and we can also look at some examples down here. So it's a really extensive list you can see of user submitted examples as well. So you can get a really great feel of different functions, not just functions but everything inside PHP from this PHP manual. So what kind of websites use PHP and why do they use it? Well, Facebook, for example, use PHP. What we're doing is with Facebook, it's a social networking website that's storing lots of data in a database. So what we can do with PHP is we can combine PHP with a database system, and we typically do this with MySQL. And certainly in the tutorials that I create, I use MySQL because MySQL is one of the wideliest used and powerful and fastest databases around. So MySQL is great to use with PHP for storing data. So Facebook is one of the social networking websites that takes advantage of PHP as a whole, as it's a really nice language to work with. A lot of the syntax and structure is similar to C, and it's actually interpreted by C server side as well. I think it's C or C, yeah, probably C. But you can obviously prove me wrong on that if you'd like. I may be wrong. But yeah, this is a brief overview of PHP. So if you're thinking about getting started in it, follow the tutorials that I've created, and you can begin to start creating dynamic websites, and you'll actually start to realize how easy PHP is, the fundamentals of it anyway. We can start going into sort of the object-oriented programming side of PHP, which is slightly more difficult because some people struggle with object-oriented programming. So we do have the object-oriented programming functionality within PHP, and this was added from PHP version 5, I believe, in about 2004. So we can use object-oriented programming inside PHP as well as recursive not recursive, procedural programming as well, so procedural structure to our code. So that's a brief overview of PHP. It's a really great language to learn, and it's really widely used on the web today, so it's definitely worth it. Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a PHP video tutorial for the new Boston. Now, if you're just getting started with PHP and want to start developing, you're going to need somewhere to test your code. Now, you may have already purchased paid hosting and you may be able to upload PHP files. Check with your host to see if they allow PHP extensions. 99% of paid and free hosting will allow you to run PHP on the server. It's pretty much a must in most cases for most hosting companies. So what happens if we want to test everything locally on our local computer? It's fair enough us creating a PHP file and uploading it to a server, but we want to quickly develop. We want to develop quickly and easily on our local machine. So what we can do is we can essentially turn our computer into a web server. Now, it's highly unrecommended that you allow people to access this web server, because if it's not properly configured, your php.ini file is not properly configured, or anything else is not configured, you're going to run into trouble. So you're going to have some security issues there. So bear in mind that everything I'm showing you is to set up you're opening another port on your computer. So you're opening up port 80 on your computer, which is going to allow people to access everything that you put into your htdocs folder. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and explain to you what you should do in order to create or install this mini web server onto your computer. Now, I personally use XAMPP, and the whole thing behind your web server and PHP is that you're going to be using Apache, and then PHP is a module, if you like, on top of Apache, which allows you to compile in the background server side, because PHP is a server side language. It allows you to compile PHP files and run them and display the contents of your actions in the browser. So basically you need something like XAMPP or something like WAMP. I'm showing you WAMP simply because you know, if you're having problems with XAMPP or for any reason you want to use WAMP, but I'm just going to show you that to tell you that it is available. However, I'm going to be dealing with XAMPP and XAMPP default directories, things like that. So if you'd like to follow along with this tutorial, I'm going to be using XAMPP. Otherwise, go and install WAMP and see if you can take anything from this tutorial away with you and apply it to WAMP settings as well. Now, the first thing you're going to need to do is obviously come to apachefriends.org, and you're going to come down here and you're going to say XAMPP for Windows, Linux, macOS, Solaris, any the obviously operating system that you are using. So it's obviously free of charge. We've got little screenshots here and easy installation, deinstallation, etc, etc, etc. So you can download this for Windows by just simply clicking XAMPP for Windows, and I'm going to be giving you the example here and running through for Windows. So I'm not going to be using Linux, macOS or Solaris. I'm going to be using Windows in this case. So once you've clicked the file or click this link, you're going to come down and you're going to say download XAMPP here. So the installation here says method A, installation with the installer or without the installer. We're going to choose XAMPP here, and what that's going to do is we can click on installer. So I'd highly recommend you install it with the installer. We're going to click that and it's going to download, so pretty simple stuff. You're going to open this installation file once it's downloaded. So obviously it's hosted with SourceForge. So you're going to save this file. You're going to wait till that's downloaded. It's 63.2 megabytes as it stands for this version. Once that is downloaded, I'm just going to cancel this because I've already got it installed. So once it is downloaded, what you want to do is you want to run through the installation process. Hopefully you won't get any errors. If you do get any errors, go onto XAMPP and see if you can find any support. Follow the instructions for installation, and once you've installed, we're going to get to the point that I'm going to talk to you now in the video. So if you'd like to pause the video or close whatever, install XAMPP, and we're going to go ahead and test everything. Okay, so hopefully now you have XAMPP installed. I haven't talked to you about what we're going to do next, but what we're actually going to do is we're going to open up something called the XAMPP control panel application. Now or the XAMPP control panel. Now what this is it's a control panel for your services that are included with XAMPP. I'm not sure what version of XAMPP I'm running at the moment, but it is a slightly older version, so depending on when you've completed the installation, this video was recorded in 2011, so depending on when you're viewing this video, your control panel may look a bit different, but nevertheless control panel is available from your programs menu within Windows. So open this up, and what you want to do is you want to make sure Apache and MySQL are running. For most cases you're going to be using, well, for all cases you're going to be using Apache, but for some tutorials and for database usage you're going to be using MySQL. So make sure that these two are running. If they're not running, they'll look something like this. Yeah, okay, oh, so they're going to look like something like that, and to start them you're just going to simply click start, and vice versa. If you need to stop them for any reason, just click stop. So now that they're both running, we see here Apache started port 80 and MySQL started port 3306. Now to access Apache and the files that you're going to be creating in PHP, this is pretty simple. With MySQL you're going to be using a web application called phpinfo, and this is bundled with XAMPP. Now MySQL for a starter is a database system. You may have heard of it. If you haven't already heard of it, go to Google, read up about it, see what it's about. You don't need to download it because obviously what we can see here is bundled with XAMPP already. So the first thing we want to do is we want to test if our web server is active. Now you're not going to be typing any domains in here or anything else. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be typing localhost. Okay, so it's just simply localhost. So if we press enter, hopefully you'll get this screen up. So if you have got this screen up, then it's got a little congratulations message. You've successfully installed XAMPP on this server, on this system. So this will mean that XAMPP is installed. Now you can also access it using 127.0.0.1. It's entirely up to you, but I prefer localhost personally, and that's what I'm going to be using throughout my tutorials. Now you'll see at the side here you've got things like status, security, the documentation, phpinfo function, which is going to give you information about your PHP installation. I do have a tutorial separate on this, so go ahead and watch that if you want to learn more. You've also got some demos here which we're not going to really be discussing. So now that we've got XAMPP successfully installed, we want to start running our own files. So we want to start creating a PHP file and running this file. So we're going to deal with that in the next part of the tutorial. This one's just about installing XAMPP. Now we need to now have a look at phpMyAdmin, and what phpMyAdmin is the administration for your database. There are tutorials that will take you through this, so you just need to know that you can access it via this link down here, and you can see that the address is 127.0.0.1/phpMyAdmin, or as we looked at before, localhost/phpMyAdmin. Okay, so that works as well. So hopefully now you've got XAMPP up and running. The next tutorial in the series is going to talk you through how to create your file and where we're going to find the place to put our file to make it accessible through our now local web server. So we're going to be looking at creating a file in the next tutorial and displaying it with the localhost address. Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and back with another video for the new Boston. Now in this tutorial we are going to go on from our previous tutorial where we installed XAMPP for Windows. Now that we're at this stage where we've installed XAMPP, we've accessed localhost, we've tested that phpMyAdmin works, so we've run our MySQL databases for when we look at databases a lot later on, and we've also brought to attention the XAMPP control panel here, which allows us to start and stop particular services. And the services that we've focused on are Apache and MySQL because these are two that we're going to use most frequently. Okay, so now this tutorial is basically going to cover how to create your first PHP file and we're going to do some little bit of output in it, nothing major because we have other tutorials explaining output and the phpinfo function as well. So have a look at the other tutorials and you'll find some great information on that. Okay, so let's go ahead, and we need to think about opening up this folder here. Let me just bring it into view. This folder here called XAMPP, and this is at c:\XAMPP by default. Depending on how you installed your XAMPP installation, depending on how you ran the installation, this might be different, but by default it's c:\XAMPP, or whatever drive you've installed it to. So replace this with your drive number, letter, sorry. Okay, so in here we've got a few folders you can see, some of which are useful to us, some of which are not. We have our PHP installation folder, which contains all our DLLs, php.ini, so let's find that. We've got php.ini here, etc, etc. So there's another tutorial on php.ini, so go and check that out. Okay, so htdocs is the folder that I want to focus on in this tutorial, because we're going to be creating our first file. Now inside htdocs, at the moment it's a bit of a mess for me. I've got a few files in here, but we want to create our PHP file in here. So let's just open up our browser. So you know now that we access our website from, or our local server from localhost. Now we don't need to do localhost /htdocs/ and our file, because htdocs here, in here is where is the root directory, if you like, for where our file should be. So let's go ahead here and I'll create a new text document, and I'm going to call this my first file.php. Now in Windows I have extension naming enabled, so I can automatically name my extension, but if you can't do it this way, you can see I've got, if you change a file name extension, blah blah blah, click yes, and that's changed now to a PHP file. Now this C icon you see is my text editor, my default text editor, and my default text editor is context. So usually, you know, you might have Notepad as your default text editor, but I recommend, if you're going to start learning PHP, download a good text editor. I use Context. I've always used Context and I prefer it. However, some people prefer to use Notepad++ or even just Notepad. And I mean, there are many out there that you can use, depending on what platform you're in as well. You might be running a Linux system, so you may have different text editors available to you. So I've created this file like this. Now what you can do is, let's delete that, and let's go over to my text editor. So I've got my text editor open here. I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to save this. I'm going to go save as, and I'm in my htdocs folder here. So I'm going to type my first file.php, and then down here I'm going to save as type all files to make sure that the extension's read. Now watch what happens to this just up here, this text files bit here, when I click save. So let's get this into view as well. I'm going to click save, and you can see that's automatically changed syntax highlighting for my file. So if now the PHP extension is applied, we can see that file's been created there for us. The extension has been applied, and now syntax highlighting has been turned on. Now syntax highlighting, if you've ever programmed before, you'll know, highlights specific parts of the syntax, so constructors, variables, string data and integers, things like that. Just everything will be highlighted differently depending on how your text editor handles that, and you can modify that as well from options menus. But we're not here to talk about that, we're here to talk about the first PHP file. Now inside our PHP file, let's just actually go to our browser first and try and access this. So we know this is saved in c:\XAMPP and htdocs. So let's go ahead to our browser and type in my first file.php. So remember, htdocs is the root folder, so all we need to do is say localhost /my first file.php. We press enter, and this file has been loaded in. Now, because it's a PHP extension, you might think that you can't put HTML data in, but we can in fact write data into here and just either plain text or HTML, and when we refresh, that's displayed on the page. So you can see now that we're accessing our files like we would on a normal server. And again, you can create folders, directories in here, and create things as you wish. So to create the first PHP file, we've done this, and our tags look like this. You'll notice that we have a less than sign, a question mark, PHP, and then we end on a question mark in here. So that's very similar to how we open up and close HTML. So we open up tags like that and end tags like that. In PHP we do this, but that's not what this tutorial is about. We've created our file, we've accessed it from our web server, and now you can go on to the tutorials where we talk about echoing out data to the user and so on and so forth, and you can start your journey learning PHP.
Hello, this is Alex from phpinfo.org, and this is a video tutorial for the new Boston. Now, in this video tutorial, we're going to get to grips with the basics of creating a PHP file, what extension we're going to give it, and how we're going to set up the inside of the file to ensure that our web server deals with it correctly. Because PHP isn't part of our web server package, we may need to specify in Apache to look out for PHP files, and you can do this in your http.conf file that we've already looked at when we've set up our Apache installation. Now, PHP is server-side, so whatever you write in between PHP tags will not be able to be viewed by people. Usually, when you create an HTML document, you'd start with your HTML tags. You'd obviously do it much more correctly than this, but you'd start with your HTML tags. You'd create your body tags, and different information and different functionality of the page will go in different places. Now in PHP it's a lot more loosely structured, and the way we do things is we use PHP tags. Now on their own, PHP tags look like this. So you can see that it is it's a mirror image of a less than sign first of all, then a greater than sign at the end here. In between are these question marks, and then just the words PHP. It can also be specified like this. Now this may look a bit odd to you at first, however what we actually do is just after PHP here, we come down and everything we want to write in PHP goes in here. So every time you set up a new page and you want to include some level of PHP in it, for example, you can combine PHP and HTML in a page. We could have our PHP tags here, and we could also have our HTML tags down here. So whenever you start up a new page and you're going to include PHP, you want to create your tags like that or like that. I'd probably recommend the use of the PHP notation at the end, at the start. So these are your PHP tags. PHP code will go inside here. So how do we go about saving our file so it can be interpreted properly by our web browser, or our web server, So we go ahead and we save the file. Now I have a folder inside my htdocs folder called series, and this is where the videos, or the code for the videos for the whole series, will go. I've created a particular folder here called first file. So this is how we're going to access it in our web browser. We're going to go to localhost, series, first file, and then we're going to have our file name here. So let's just call this document, let's say, we'll call it index.php, because typically an Apache installation will take an index.php and index.html files as default files to be loaded inside a folder. And by that I mean, if your file is named anything else, so I'm going to call this just for file.php for now. Remember, we're using .php. You can, just to be sure, choose all files here and enclose that in double quotation marks, just to make sure your text editor saves it with a correct file extension. So let's save this. We've shown that we've saved this as a PHP document. My text editor context has automatically turned on syntax highlighting for PHP. This just means that PHP code and different aspects of code will be highlighted so we can read things easier. For example, variables are green, and function names are typically a grey colour, and things like keywords, so for example for each, which is a language construct, are blue. And it depends, so strings can be brown, for etc, etc. So we've got this file and we've saved that. Now if we come in here and refresh our browser, you can see that the file appears here. Now if I click on this, that's our PHP document ready to go. We can start programming and we can start displaying output to the user and calculating. And as you can see, if you've clicked to view the page source, there's nothing there. So let's combine some HTML with PHP and see what happens. And you can see now that by just including some HTML tags and refreshing the page, you can see that these actually show up. However, our PHP code will be up here. However, it won't be shown because it's interpreted by our web server. That's where everything's sort of calculated, and then we display the output that we want using PHP. So it's a server-side scripting language as opposed to HTML, which is just tags that are interpreted by different browsers. Okay, so like I said earlier, you can name your file and give it a specific file name, or you can choose to name it index.php. So I'm going to start up some PHP tags and I'm going to save this as index.php. Now this is in this directory if we go back, so when I refresh, index.php will automatically be opened. We won't have this index of /series/first file. We won't be able to see the files, we'll just be presented with the index.php page. And to test this, I'm going to use a simple command in PHP to demonstrate this. I'm going to say echo, and this is my output. There's a tutorial on echo and what it does, or you'll see what it does, but how it works and a bit more information about it. So for now, I'm just going to be outputting this to the screen. So let's refresh the page. You can see that we've automatically gone to index.php. My browser doesn't show it up here, but let's just type that in manually so we can definitely see. So the page, it's automatically gone to index.php. If I just choose to go to the file, the folder I mean, is exactly the same. So these are different conventions of naming files. If you name something anything else other than what's specified, index.php and index.html I think are default specified in an Apache configuration. However, normal files are not named to open by default. So that's a bit about naming files and how you should name and create your files. And you've learned also how to set your PHP tags up, ready to code inside them.
Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org and welcome to a PHP video tutorial for the new Boston. Now after we've installed PHP and perhaps later on in our PHP development, we may need to take a detailed look at everything within our PHP installation. So for example, you might go on later to look at the GD library. So the GD library is used to generate images using its command set. So it's an addition to PHP. It may not be included. Well, I know it's not included with the original PHP installation. So for example, if someone was to say to you, do you have curl installed or do you have GHD image installed, and you know what these are, and there's different libraries for PHP, but you needed to find a way to quickly check everything in your PHP installation and just find general information about your PHP version. For example, someone might ask you, or you might need to find out which PHP version you're using, because obviously different features of PHP work with different versions. You may have an older version of PHP which then later features aren't available, so you always want to check that you updated the latest PHP version, and you can check this also using this phpinfo function that we're going to be talking about. So to call the function is relatively simple. It's just within your PHP tags. Remember, we create our PHP tags like this. We can do PHP and then info and then 2 brackets. So this is the standard notation for calling a function. You can see that my text editor hasn't turned it blue like it normally would with other language constructs. For example, echo, you can see is automatically turned blue. This is because it's a language construct within PHP. It's something that's built in and enables something to happen when we run it. So phpinfo, we're just calling a function because you can see that it's remained black. Just like when we type something that doesn't exist, for example, it's also black. So you need to watch out for this. This means that we're calling a function. So we're calling the function phpinfo, and I've saved this in index.php. So let's go over to our browser and let's refresh and see what we get. Okay, so here you can see that we are listing a selection of data about our PHP installation. So we've got PHP version, so very top in large letters we've got the version that we're running. Then if we go down, we can see different things, things that are enabled, for example, not enabled. Then we can come down and look at specific things like inside the PHP core. So a lot of these will be relative to your php.ini file, which we looked at previously and we will be looking at later on in the tutorials. So let's just go down and see what information we have. Okay, so we've got all this information. We've got information about Apache as well, the Apache environment, so that's our web server, HTTP headers information, down here about BC Math calendar and just things like this that we don't have installed currently. Then we can come down to things like FTP support, GD. So for example, earlier I mentioned the GD library. You can see that GD support is enabled. We've got the GD version, which is bundled with this package, etc, etc. We've got support for different things. So you can find a lot of information out about your PHP installation by calling this function, and it generates a long list of details about your PHP installation. Now, one thing is really important. You mustn't keep a file with this function on your server. You must not have this live on a server. Or in fact, even on your local machine, if you know that you're not protected against people accessing this, this will give people lots of detailed information about your PHP installation. Now, the reason I'm okay to show you is because I'm working on a local machine. It's not giving any information that could harm my my computer through my internet connection. But if you're running say a website and you had this command somewhere on your website that allow people to view, they can view all sorts of information about your PHP installation. So despite now seeing it work, you also must realize that if you have to do this, do it and then quickly delete it. So that's just a bit of security advice for you. So we've run through the phpinfo function, which gives out information about your PHP installation, and obviously you can use this when you need to find out any specifics about your PHP package. Hello, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a video tutorial for the new Boston. Now in this video we're going to be looking at our php.ini file. Now ini files, or ini files, however you decide to pronounce them. I say ini just because I'm being literal and saying each character. Is basically a configuration file. So you know that as soon as we see the file php.ini, we automatically know that this is a PHP configuration file. Now, what is our configuration file, our PHP configuration file, and where can we find it? Now, I've opened my text editor here, so I can open this file and we can have a look through at some of the features inside it and how we can change things about our PHP installation. So you can have a good look at this, maybe print it out, take it around with you, look at different things, because it's really useful to get to know inside of your php.ini file, because a lot of PHP problems that you'll later realize when you're coding actually come down to the settings in your php.ini file. So let's create an open dialog, open up an open dialog. Now you can see that at the moment I'm in c:\\XAMPP/PHP. Now this is because I'm running an XAMPP package. You can see here I've got my XAMPP control panel open, and I've got Apache MySQL running, blah blah blah. This is just my package that I've installed that contains Apache along with PHP installed with Apache. So this is our folder with PHP, and it's got all the information and the runtime DLLs about with regards to our PHP installation. Now obviously the file we want is, let's just find it, it would be here, is php.ini. So this is the typical location depending on whether you've installed PHP yourself, if you've installed Apache and PHP yourself, or if you're using a package such as XAMPP, LAMP, some of the others ones, we've got WAMP I think. So let's go ahead and just open up our php.ini. Now obviously if you are having trouble finding this, you can just do a local search on your computer. Just make sure it looks like it's in a sort of relative location to your local web server. Okay, so when we open up this file, you notice that we have a warning and a bit about php.ini. Now this is very important. By default, PHP installs itself with a configuration suitable for development purposes and not for production purposes. Now what this means is the default installation php.ini is not suitable for when you were to, if you were to say, okay, so I've got a local web server on my computer, here's my IP address, you can see what pages I'm running. Always, 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 when you want to show people or release PHP files or a project that you've created, always upload it to a paid hosting or a free hosting, but some kind of commercial hosting website. Because what you don't want is you don't want to have the inexperience of not setting this file up properly and you suffering for that. So there's lots of security aspects that when we enable settings and disable settings in this php.ini file, we tend to find that we're allowing ourselves vulnerability. So we can go down, you can see the standard syntax in here is that we've got the semicolon as end of a line. So, well, as a comment in this purpose. So you can see that we've got loads of semicolons here that are basically just commenting this out. So this won't be processed by PHP. So let's go down and find a setting. Okay, so you can see that things like engine on is not commented out. So these are settings that are currently in use and that you can modify. So let's go down and find something that we might change. Okay, so you've got things like zlib.output compression off. You've got a quite a descriptive description up here, quite an extensive description of what it does, as you do with most settings. So you'll find that a lot of this file is actually description. So we're not going to change any settings now, we'll leave that till later when we need to. We're going to talk about things like error handling and how we can change this inside our php.ini file. Just one more note is when you make a modification to php.ini, if you were to say print this out and go through and read it, and you might get to a stage in your programming where you know that you want to change a value. Now once you've changed a value and you've saved the file, so you go file and save, that's absolutely fine. However, what you need to do is you need to either restart Apache manually, or you need to bring up your XAMPP or similar control panel and stop this service before you restart it. So for example, if I was to change something in here, so if it was to change this value for any reason, I can then open up my XAMPP or other control panel, and I stop the service, simply stop the service. Let's press that again. Okay, so the service is now stopped. We can click start again, wait till that starts back up, and it's running again. Now what we've done is PHP has taken into account the changes that you've made and will now process them according to what you've written. So my strong recommendation will be to have a look through this, see if anything catches your eye, get to know different values and what they do, and read some of the descriptions if you have time, because it's a really, really useful file to know what you're doing with. A lot of PHP problems that crop up, like I said, are to do with files or to do with the values in this either being disabled or enabled or switched to something that not allowing a certain piece of code that you're using or certain method you're using on your website or code not to work. So php.ini file is basically the PHP configuration file for PHP. Have a browse around it, and hopefully it will be of some use to you in the future. Hello, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a PHP video tutorial for the new Boston. Now in this video tutorial I'm going to be talking about code indentation, what code indentation is and why it should be used. Now, for an example, let's take a look at the following file. I've got index2.php. Now this file works, it works perfectly in fact, apart from one thing I've just spotted, and if name equals str to lower, this needs to change, str to lower. Okay, so I always forget something. Okay, so the file that we're looking at now works perfectly. Let's go ahead and open our browser and test it. Okay, so let's open that up. Okay, so it says you're over 21, yes, 1 is equal to 1. So let's go back to our code and see why. So if the name, the string name to lower, blah, 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 it doesn't really matter what the code looks like, is equal to Alex, then do this, echo this part of the code. Otherwise, say you're not Alex. So if we change this name here to say Dale, and we refresh, it says you're not Alex. So the code works. That's essentially all we need to know for now. Now the problem with this is the way that we have not indented it. So there's no code indentation, therefore it's hard to see where an if statement starts and where an if statement ends. So if we needed to make modifications to a program, it's going to be a lot harder if we don't use code indentation. Now there's 14 lines to this program. Can you just, or this code, this page or script if you like. Imagine if we had 1400 lines and we didn't use indentation. You can imagine how awful it's going to look and how messy it's going to look. So let's go ahead and look at index.php, which is a duplicate of this. However, I've created line indentation for each, where it's necessary. Okay, so what I've done is after the first if statement, I've indented to make a new if statement. So if, and then inside here we've indented. And now inside this if statement, I've indented all the code here. Okay, so the if statement, everything by default starts on without being indented. We've made the first if statement, so the block I can already tell is just from the start of this I here down to here. So this is the start of the block and this is the end of the block here, and this is the start of the top block and this is the end, and then we say else. So inside of this block here where we're saying is age greater than or equal to 21, this is inside, and we can automatically tell that because we've got straight down here, straight down here, and straight down here, and then we've indented just the echo inside of here. So you can see how code indentation makes a whole lot of difference when you're trying to view a file. So for example, if I want to say if age does not, saying if age is greater than or equal to 21, I want to say, well, maybe I want to create an if else statement rather than just an if statement. Let's go down and we can automatically see that's the end of the block, and we can start typing on here. My text editor automatically indents for you. I think Notepad++ is a lot better at this than Context, as well as a variety of other editors. But now we can just type in something here, not over 21 for example, and when we change this to say 16, we know that our program is going to work because we've already seen the indentation, and we've created the code. We've created the program to work according to these, and the indentation just makes everything a lot easier to see. So always use indentation in your code. It's part of the coding standards, which is very important when you're looking at code, especially when you're going to be distributing code or you need other people to read code. You may understand how your code works and it may work in fact, so you might think, why do I need to indent and everything like that? Well, the answer is that if other people do need to see your code, or if you need to make quick modifications to your code, it's going to be a lot easier to see if you've used indentation.
Okay, I'm Alex from PHP Academy, and this is a video tutorial created for the new Boston. This video tutorial is going to be on PHP Echo. Now, Echo is a language construct within PHP that allows us to output data, or string data if you like, to the user's browser. Now you can see at the moment I've got a file open in my text editor. This is index.php. So we've used our .php file extension, and we've set up our PHP tags that are going to let us enter our commands, if you like, within them. And in this video we're going to be focusing on the echo language construct. So I've got the page open in my browser, or nearly the page open in my browser. So now I'm viewing index.php. You can see at the moment obviously there's nothing on the page because we haven't started writing. Now echo is, like I said, a language construct. It's not a function. It allows you to basically output to the screen into the browser. So how do we write this? Well, it's simply just echo. We can either use double quotation marks or we can use single quotation marks, and you'll learn about later on why you should use them and when you should use them. Basically, double quotation marks allow you to echo out variables inside them. If you've programmed before, you'll know what variables are. However, single quotation marks will only let you echo variables if you append them, and we append with a full stop. But obviously this tutorial is on echo, so we're not going to go too much into detail. Remember, your line terminator at the end, you need a semicolon at the end of your line, otherwise we're going to run into some errors. In fact, what we'll do is we'll show that without that so we can see what the error is like in the browser. So I just want to say hello world. If I refresh this in my browser, you're going to see that we're going to well, actually we haven't got an error, and the reason for this is that we don't have any other lines in the program. But let's, for example, create a new line here, and let's just say hello. Hello again, and let's refresh, and you can see that we've got a parse error. Now it says we're expecting either a comma or a semicolon on the end of line 3. So line 3 is here. The reason for this is it's expecting it just before this E. So just before this E is in fact the end of this line. We add our semicolon in, and we're working again. So this is basically how to output data to the screen. Let's just refresh. You can see hello world there. Again, like I said before, if you do use double quotation marks, this is absolutely fine. It doesn't make a difference. It will produce exactly the same output. So within these tags, within these quotation marks, what can we actually do? Now we can also echo out HTML to the page, because as we echo out, it's rendered as you would find an HTML page. If we put things like strong tags, for example, around this, you can see that when we refresh, it's taken that into account, and we've made this text now bold. You could potentially create a whole HTML document inside an echo, inside a language construct, echo language construct, inside these speech marks, if you like. However, we tend not to do this. We tend to just echo out what we need. I mean, things like strong tags for bold, italics, underlined, sometimes even form data is okay, but later on in the series you'll learn that there are other ways to handle this. But for now, that's basically how you would output data to your browser. Hi there, I'm Alex from PHP Academy, and this is another video tutorial produced for the new Boston. This time we're going to be talking about the print language construct in PHP. Now you can see that I'm using the previous echo example here from the previous video talking about echoing out data to the user's browser, or string data to the user's browser. Now print does not differ whatsoever. Just for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to just change this text to hello with an exclamation mark. So I'm also going to change this to print. You can see my text editor has highlighted this blue again, so we can see that this is a language construct, and it's still valid. However, when we refresh, we get exactly the same result as we do with echo. Now you may be thinking, why are there two different now print works slightly different to echo in the way that it is actually an older way to, and a more sort of traditional way, if you like, to print data out, basically. I mean, to the browser in this case. So it's also slower to use than Echo, and if you wanted to be really petty, it also has more characters, so people tend to find it's quicker to use Echo. Also, when we're using print, traditionally we would use brackets, as it behaves more like a function, even though it still is a language construct. So basically, in short, it's a lot better to use Echo. The main reason for this is it being a lot quicker, using less system resources. So even though you can use print, and later on in the tutorial series we will come across things like print R, which aren't in fact too tightly related to print itself, but you will maybe come across print at some point in programs. However, if you're programming sort of from now on, we're going to be using Echo, and it's probably better to use Echo as well. Hello, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and in this PHP tutorial for the new Boston, I am going to be showing you how to echo HTML out to a page. So we already know how to echo data. It's just basically echoing out whatever string data we want, and this will produce the result here. Now, what happens if we want to echo out some HTML data? Let's say I want to echo out an input text for a form. So normally this would be done outside our PHP tags. We'd have input type equals, and we'd have two double quotes, and this would be text. We could have name equals, let's just say name, and value equals, at the moment we can just say Alex, although this can be user specified, so we don't really need this. Now, as this stands, this is going to produce this result. We've got just a simple text area here. We can type text in here. Simple. Now, what happens if I want to, somewhere in a PHP program, when we develop into more advanced PHP programs, or code rather, I want to echo this out inside here. Now, you saw in my previous examples that I could use double quotation marks, and this produces a result similar to this. Okay, so it works. Now, let's just say I want to put this straight into here. Now you think, well, it's just going to echo the text out. That's absolutely fine. It's going to process this as HTML, as we've already seen. Now let's refresh. You can see that we've received this parse error, and it's saying expecting a comma or a semicolon on line 2. So if we go over to line 2, we can see it is indeed this line here, and it doesn't tell us where we're expecting our semicolon necessarily within, but we are in fact expecting it here. And the reason we're expecting it in this position is because this has told us that we're ending our echo output. And the reason for this is because we've started with double quotation marks, this appears to be ending with double quotation marks. Now, there are a few resolutions in order to correct this. We can in fact use single quotes inside a double quoted echo output. So we're using double quotes on the outside here, and then what we can do is we can use single quotes on the inside, which will still correctly be processed by HTML. So if we refresh that, we get exactly the same result as we did beforehand. Now, this in fact is by standards incorrect. We want to use double quotation marks wherever possible. So how can we resolve this if we need to use double quotation marks inside? Now, there are one of two ways. The first way to do this is to change the double quotation marks on the outside of your string to single quotation marks, and you can see that if I refresh, we don't produce any error, so this has worked. Also, using single quotation marks is a lot quicker, so we're processing this whole line a lot quicker than we would be if we were using double quotation marks. And the reason for this is, using double quotation marks, it's looking for variables inside, and generally it is just a tiny bit slower. So if you can imagine you've got a long program that you're echoing out a lot of data, try and use single quotation marks and you're going to speed up your script more than significantly. So there is another option if you must use double quotation marks on the outside for any reason, and we can use a specific character to escape another character, and in PHP this is a backslash. So if I was to create a backslash here and a backslash here, a backslash here and a backslash here, you can already see that there's a pattern emerging. We're escaping this character, this character, this character and this character. So any character after this is going to escape it. And what I mean by this is it's going to tell PHP that we want to process this not as anything within PHP, but we want to process this as something in an output. So let's refresh the page and see what happens. You can see that it's worked. So we can even, just to test that it's definitely working, add in a value to this form field of Alex inside this box. So we refresh and we see that that's updated absolutely fine. So that's just a short and sharp way of learning how to echo HTML inside. Obviously when you get to more complex programs and you're using lots of double quotation marks and you're echoing out maybe a bit more HTML data, which isn't recommended anyway, but if you must, then it's probably better to just use your single quotation marks in the outside, and then there's no need for these escaping characters to appear within. Okay, so that's basically it on echoing HTML out inside PHP. Hello, this is Alex from PHP Academy, and this is another PHP video tutorial for the new Boston. Now in this tutorial I'm going to be talking about embedding PHP inside HTML. Now you obviously probably all know what embedding is. It's just putting something within something, embedding it inside. So if I was to set up my PHP document, and let's just use the example of, let's say, outputting hello world. Now if we come into our browser and refresh this, we can see that we produced with the text hello world. This is a pretty standard example and nothing's changed since my more basic tutorials. So how about if we want to, let's say, actually embed some text inside, for example, an input text box. Now I'm going to get rid of this and I'm going to start typing an input tag, and I'm going to give it the type of text, and we'll just say the value of hello. So what this is going to produce, I'm not using any HTML tags just to keep things simple. Obviously you would set your page out properly. This example will produce a small text box with the text hello, which obviously is editable, so we can do what we want with it. Let's go back into this. So how about if I wanted to take a variable in PHP and just pop it into here, which later on in programming you will want to do, because you'll want to, say, dynamically update forms, and this is a great example to show you of how to take variables within PHP and put them straight into forms. So let's have our PHP tags at the top of the page. Now already what we're doing is we're combining PHP with HTML inside the same document. We're still using the PHP extension for our file. However, we can just plainly echo out HTML, as you've already seen, or not echo out, but display HTML. Now inside PHP up here, I'm just going to create a new variable called text. Remember, using the $ and then our variable name, and we're going to make that equal to hello world. Now let's just say this was something that the user may have submitted, or that something's in a database, or something a bit more useful than some static text that we've just declared up here. Now what happens if I want to pop this value of this variable inside here? Now you basically simply have to start up a PHP tag. You can end your PHP tag just so you're ready to fill in your content, and all you need to do is you need to echo out the variable, remembering your line terminator. Because PHP code is processed on a one-line basis, it doesn't incorporate different lines necessarily when it's processed as a whole. So by doing this all in one line, you're still producing the same effect as if you were to do this. It would work in exactly the same way. So we can in fact just pull all this in so it's all on one line, and it just looks a lot neater as well. So now what we do is when we refresh the page, we have the contents of that variable embedded, if you like, into our HTML page. So these are the basics of embedding PHP inside HTML. Hello, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a video tutorial for the new Boston. Now in this tutorial we're going to be covering comments inside PHP. Now if you've programmed before in any other language, you'll understand how important commenting your code is. This could be in large chunks or commenting single lines just to show yourself and other programmers what the program does, and maybe just add notes for copyright reasons or anything else. Now I've created this extremely simple and basic PHP script which basically just outputs hello world to the browser. Now obviously us looking at this we know exactly what it does, but for the purpose of this tutorial I'm going to be commenting it just to let anyone else that's looking at it understand what's going on. So the first type of commenting is just single line commenting. So what I've done is I've pulled this down a bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 forward slashes. Now you can see that as I type text, my text editor's changed this to italics and it's turned grey. Now this is just a standard notation for my text editor to show me a comment. This just makes sure it doesn't interfere with the readability of the code. So you'll probably find that whatever text editor you're doing that, unless you're using something basic like Notepad, it's not going to show you. But in this case it does. So I'm going to comment uses echo language construct to output the text hello world to the browser. So that's a simple comment that shows anyone that's watching this what this does. Now what we can also do is we can add comments directly after lines, as long as they're not obviously before anything important like this code. So for example, if I was to put 2 forward slashes, this is automatically now commented out and that line of code won't run. But this is also useful if you were to run through a program and you're debugging it. You could just quickly put some forward slashes and test different parts of your code and remove parts of your code that you didn't want to run. Now let's say I want to add up here a little bit of information about this page, who it's created by and the date. So I want to create a long sort of paragraph, or a short paragraph in this case, of just text explaining about the program. Now to do this I'm going to use a forward slash and then an asterisk. I'm going to come down a few lines and I'm going to type another asterisk and then another forward slash. Now you could see then just while I was typing that this text down here was going grey. Now that I've ended that, everything inside here is going to be regarded as a comment. So you can see that this is a lot easier than doing this for several lines, because you may want several lines to write on each line, but obviously the easier way would be to use this notation. So now what we can do is we can write some information inside here, so we could just pop the date in, and that's just a lot better way, and it looks neater as well. Obviously you could bring, say, this up here if you really wanted to. It's entirely up to you, but anything between this and this is going to be regarded as a comment system, and these are one-line comment systems, or comments, which can be placed either above, below, or after a line, but obviously not before, because that's going to render your code unreadable by PHP. So that's commenting in PHP.